The idea that one saint might foresee the rise of another is not far-fetched, especially when that first saint is Padre Pio, a man gifted with visions, prophecy, and mystical insight beyond human understanding. And in recent years, as the world comes to know the story of Carlo Acutis, the teenage tech whiz who became a modern-day model of holiness, some are now asking, did Padre Pio see him coming? Carlo Acutis, who died in 2006 at the age of 15 and was beatified in 2020, shocked the world not just because of his early death, but because of his remarkable devotion to the Eucharist, his joyful holiness, and his ability to evangelize using modern technology. His story feels like a bridge, a teenager in sneakers who pointed millions toward heaven using computers and websites. But long before Carlo's birth, there were whispers, from Padre Pio himself, about a new kind of apostle. Padre Pio once told a spiritual daughter during confession, "God will raise a young soul who will speak in the language of the future, but proclaim the truths of the ancient church." At the time, it made little sense. Computers were in their infancy. The internet was decades away. But Padre Pio had already spoken of future saints who would reach the world without leaving their homes, who would battle darkness not with swords, but with the light of truth, sent out through invisible lines. What makes this more remarkable is that Carlo Acutis had a special devotion to Padre Pio. Though born decades after the friar's death, Carlo visited San Giovanni Rotondo, the site of Padre Pio's ministry, and even kept a photo of the saint near his bed. He believed Padre Pio had interceded for him, guided his mission, and walked with him in spirit. His mother once shared that Carlo spoke of Padre Pio as if he were a close friend. So was Padre Pio speaking of Carlo when he mentioned the young soul of the future? Many believe so. Others say the prophecy fits too many figures. But what's undeniable is this. Padre Pio's vision of a youthful, tech-savvy evangelist who defends the Eucharist, it fits Carlo Acutis like a glove. If there's one thing that bonded Carlo Acutis and Padre Pio across time, it was their blazing love for the Eucharist. For Padre Pio, the Eucharist was the very center of his existence. He would weep at Mass, spending hours in contemplation, bleeding from his stigmata as he offered the sacrifice. And for Carlo, a modern teen surrounded by noise, games, and gadgets, the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. Carlo once said, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." He attended daily Mass from the age of 7, often prayed the Rosary, and made visits to the Blessed Sacrament part of his daily life. He built an entire website cataloging Eucharistic miracles from around the world, wanting everyone to see that Jesus is truly alive, not just in history, but in the host. This mirrors something Padre Pio himself used to say, "It is easier for the earth to live without the sun than for man to live without the Eucharist." He, too, wanted people to know that the Eucharist was not symbolic, but the living, breathing Jesus Christ. Both saints made it their mission to bring souls back to the altar, back to the very heart of God. Some mystics and biographers believe that Padre Pio's prophetic reference to the young soul who would speak the language of the future was especially tied to the defense of the Eucharist. He spoke of a time when many would grow cold toward the sacraments, and that God would send a young flame to rekindle devotion through truth wrapped in modern tools. What did Carlo do? He used the internet, what many say is the most secular, corrupted space, to preach reverence, beauty, and divine love. He didn't preach with pride. He built websites, created videos, and helped kids his age understand that holiness isn't outdated, it's essential. That sounds a lot like Padre Pio's vision decades before it ever happened. Even their spirituality overlaps. Padre Pio's life was marked by suffering, offered in union with Christ. Carlo, too, embraced suffering with courage. When diagnosed with leukemia, he said, "I offer all the suffering I will have to undergo for the Lord, for the Pope, and the Church. No fear, only surrender, just like Pio." Padre Pio spent most of his life behind the walls of a monastery, yet his impact reached millions across the world. His confessional was a battleground where he spent up to 16 hours a day hearing confessions, reconciling sinners, and bringing souls back to the mercy of God. People traveled across continents just to sit at his feet and unburden their souls. And often, without a word, Padre Pio would reveal sins they hadn't spoken aloud. His spiritual reach extended far beyond the monastery gates. Now contrast that with Carlo Acutis, a teenager with a laptop living in the early 2000s. He didn't have a confessional, a monastery, or a religious habit. What he had was the internet, and instead of using it for distraction, he turned it into a tool for evangelization. At just 11 years old, Carlo began building a website cataloging Eucharistic miracles, sharing them in multiple languages. It spread across the globe. Schools, parishes, dioceses began to use it as a tool of catechesis. Just like Padre Pio, Carlo brought people back to confession, back to Jesus. But he did it through a screen. Padre Pio once said, "Souls are being lost because there is no one to pray and offer for them." And what did Carlo do? He prayed, fasted, suffered silently, and offered it all, not for fame or attention, but for the salvation of others. Carlo would fast from television, games, and sweets, not because he had to, but because he understood that souls were worth the sacrifice. That kind of inner fire, at such a young age, is rare. And for those who believe Padre Pio saw him in a vision, this alignment is too precise to ignore. Both Carlo and Padre Pio lived counterculturally. One wore a habit, the other a hoodie. But both stood as signs of contradiction in a world that wanted ease without holiness. Padre Pio drew people with his mystical gifts and spiritual authority. Carlo drew people with his purity, joy, and relatability. But the fruit was the same, a turning of hearts toward God. And here's something even more mysterious. Carlo was born in 1991 and died in 2006, yet his body was found incorrupt, his face peaceful, his clothes unworn, like he had just gone to sleep. Sound familiar? Many said the same about Padre Pio when they first saw his body after death. Both were young at heart. Both showed signs of incorruption. Both left behind a trail of miracles. In a world consumed by noise, screens, and speed, the connection between Padre Pio and Carlo Acutis might be more than coincidence. It might be a divine pattern. 2 lives, 2 centuries, 2 very different missions, and yet both men stirred the same fire in the Church, the call to return to the Eucharist, to confession, to purity, to purpose. Padre Pio once warned, "The world will chase miracles but forget the miracle maker. God will raise voices to remind them." If that prophecy was truly his, then Carlo may very well be the voice he foresaw. A voice wrapped in the innocence of a teenager, speaking the language of code and pixels, yet carrying the weight of eternal truth. It's no surprise that both saints focused their lives around the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. It was not just part of their faith, it was their faith. Pio offered it daily with trembling hands and bleeding wounds. Carlo attended daily with joy, documenting miracles the world had forgotten. Both believed that if people could just encounter Jesus in the Eucharist, really, truly, everything would change. And maybe that's the final thread tying them together. Padre Pio knew a future generation would need more than sermons. It would need witnesses, not just priests and monks, but kids in jeans, not just mystics in monasteries, but teenagers behind keyboards. He saw it coming, He warned us to look for the soul who would walk quietly but leave a trail of light behind him. Carlo Acutis once said, "All are born original, but many die as photocopies." Padre Pio, long before him, said, "Don't let your soul be a shadow, let it be a flame." Different words, same fire. So, did Padre Pio predict Carlo Acutis? We may never know for certain, but one thing is clear: he prepared the world to receive him, and in doing so, he gave us a roadmap through suffering, sacrament, simplicity, and surrender, to live as saints in any age, in any language, even in a digital world. Because in the end, it doesn't matter if the prophet saw the prodigy. What matters is that the same Spirit lit them both and still wants to light us.